So here's what happened. There was a second American Revolution. That's not how it's described in history books, because there was a peaceful second revolution. And what it was, the people we call our framers or our founding fathers, they got together in secret behind closed doors, and they rewrote the Constitution. And what the Constitution is, what I mean by Constitution again is a description of who decides what when in a coherent environment. They rewrote it, and they were committing treason. This isn't how it's taught in high school. They were committing treason because they were sworn to protect a former the old Constitution, the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation had a description of how you would amend it. The way you would amend it is you would get unanimous consent from all 13 states for any change. And there were repeated attempts to amend it to give the central government more power to tax. They were always defeated. So what happened, it's a long story, is a bunch of our founding fathers met in secret in Philadelphia behind closed doors. They swore that they would never say what they did behind those closed doors until after all of them were dead. And with one exception, that promise was kept. 45 people kept that promise. So what they did is they, well, people asked, what are those guys meeting behind closed doors? The reason they said was, we're going to suggest some amendments to the Articles of Confederation. That's not what they did. At day one, they tore up the Articles of Confederation, and they said, we're going to rewrite the Constitution. And there's a Marxist interpretation of this that was written by Charles Beard in 1900, and it is that the creditors of the U.S. government got together and they reconstituted the government to make their credits good. And I'm not a Marxist, but on this occasion I am, because that's what they did. And here's how they did it. Their reasoning is described very well by a 33-year-old kid, Alexander Hamilton, who's the first Secretary of Treasury. So, together with the Constitution and the first Congress of the United States, they rearrange institutions, and they do brilliant. It's beyond mechanism design. It's political economy. So, what the U.S. Constitution does is it takes the main tax away from the 13 states, and it gives it to the center. So the U.S. Constitution says states cannot issue tariffs, and the tariff is the monopoly of now the central government. So if the central government wants to tax, it can. The states cannot. Furthermore, the states cannot regulate foreign trade. So now the United States central government has the ability, if it wants, to retaliate against the British. And this was done by the people who met behind Philadelphia were agreed. These weren't debatable. They agreed they wanted the central government to tax, and they wanted it to tax sufficiently to service the U.S. government debt. The U.S. government debt. And they wanted that because, well, I'll come back to that. They wanted it. I'll ask why in a second. And then here's the second thing that the first acts of Congress did is, one of the first things Congress did is, by the way, we're still in a monetary union with Spain. So the currency is still the dollar. All this is with the dollar. Spanish dollar. So, there's a question. Do you have to have a fiscal union before a monetary union, or can you have a monetary union before? We had a monetary union the whole time. We had a no fiscal union, and we had debt that was, going at deep discount. Nobody was bailing us out. So historically and theoretically, you can do that. Okay, so now the question is this, and read Alexander Hamilton on why he says he's going to do this. So what happens is there's a grand bargain made. There's a grand bargain made. And this was understood at the time that the Constitution was written. The grand bargain was the federal government, the central government, is going to completely bail out the debt of all the states. Remember I told you all the 13 states had debt that was going at various discounts? The first Congress completes the grand bargain, and it says we're going to assume or bail out or nationalize or you're going to nationalize or assume the debt of all the 13 states. So that state debt of Virginia or New York became the debt, became U.S. government debt. And why did they do that? Hamilton says why he's going to do that. He wants to realign interests. He wants to convert the creditors of the states to become creditors of the U.S. government. And the reason he wants to do that is he wants those creditors they're mostly Americans, he wants them to become advocates of a strong central government that's going to support the tariffs that are sufficient to service their debt. So he's realigning this question of who decides what when, the simple economic concept. And Hamilton realizes that there's no dictator, and what's going to happen is going to be voters and there's going to be lobbyists. He wants the most important lobbyists, mainly the moneyed interests that own this state debt, who wanted, in the old days, they'd be advocates of a strong state government taxing to service their debt. He wants them to become advocates of a strong central government. So this is all about moving sovereignty, fiscal sovereignty from the states to the center and realigning interests, because he realizes democracy. He wants to realign interests so that voters are going to do the things that are going to service the debt. So it's very sophisticated. So you could say, economists can stand up here and say, oh, it's really easy to fix this debt crisis that the United States had. Just start paying your debts. Just start taxing more. Well, that's vacuous. Of course, it's true. It's because it's respecting that present value, but it's ignoring the politics. Well, George Washington and Alexander Hamilton didn't ignore the politics, and they couldn't. They were rearranging the interests so that you got away from Ronald Reagan's dream to the construction of a government that could tax, spend, and borrow. And it could borrow because it had the ability to tax and spend. So they rewrote the Constitution, and guess what? It worked. That government debt that was going at 10 or 20 cents on the dollar, quickly in 1790 and 1791, at the beginning of our country, it went from 10 and 20 cents on the dollar to a par. So if you had bought this debt at 10 or 20 cents on the dollar, you would have made a killing.